Hello and welcome to Platform Diaries Summer Edition. I'm your host, Shane Williams. Over the summer break, we'll be taking a look back at some of the more popular episodes from Season 1. I hope you enjoy this episode and look forward to sharing our new look and feel Platform Diaries in February 2022. Happy holidays.
Welcome to Platform Diaries with Shane Williams, where each fortnight you'll hear the stories of industry veterans and learn the secrets to sustainably amplifying value from your software platform investments.
Welcome to the very first episode of Platform Diaries. I'm Shane Williams. My first guest is Frank Cuiuli. He's the CEO of 8 Squad, an implementation partner for Salesforce. Frank has more than 2 decades of leadership experience. He's a martial arts expert and a neurophysics therapist, which combined provide a unique perspective on high-performance leadership. I hope you enjoy the interview. Frank, thanks for joining me.
Thanks a lot, mate. Good to be here.
Pleasure to have you. Could you tell us a little bit about your background, your leadership philosophy, and a little bit about what 8 Squad's all about?
Yeah, 100%. Where do I jump into that? Look, for me, my background is pretty diverse in that, I started off life kind of in a professional sports space, training, competing as a martial artist, traveling around my martial arts career. But I kind of pivoted early in life towards a more traditional career setting and headed into technology. It was, I guess, sheer luck more than anything. It wasn't by design at all. My parents, good Italian middle income kind of family, right, was, Frank, you need a proper career in martial arts. It's not going to be it. And they're probably right. But I happened to meet someone who gave me my first job in tech. And then, that pretty much set me up for the next 20 years of my life. When everything, early days from retail, then into distribution until I finally made my way into software, and pretty much then spent the rest of my time in the software space. Worked for a lot of the kind of big software vendors. I worked for Tibco, that was integration specialist back in the day. Then Oracle and IBM. So pretty much mostly in sales leader kind of roles and like strategic biz dev. And then there came a point where it kind of, rather than whinge about what I didn't like about companies, and I thought, well, go start your own. And myself and 2 other gentlemen who became my co-founders at Veltio, we basically headed off and started this consultancy and, focused on the Salesforce space because one of the co-founders, Jamie, actually was one of the VPs of Salesforce services before he had left, and so he knew the landscape. But that was, we founded that business on the principle of what are we going to do different and how are we going to run our company that is in a manner which addresses all the things we didn't like about some of the big corporates we'd worked for. And that was really the kind of beginning of this whole notion of culture. Back then, mate, that word in 2009, it really wasn't, a big focus, right? And, came across some literature on Zappos, and God rest his soul, actually, Tony Shea, just passed away, which was really unfortunate. But Tony was the inspiration really for myself to kind of explore this cultural space. And through Tony, we found, John King, who was an author of Tribal Leadership. And we built the whole company around those kind of principles. We were fast growth. I think, within 3 years, we had a number of people knocking at our door, and we eventually sold to Blue Wolf. And then Con and Jamie decided to move on and do new things. And I stayed on and did the integration, basically took Blue Wolf through to when they sold to IBM. And at that point, exited altogether. The industry took the opportunity to get back to some of my roots in high performance and health. And, went back to study. Went back to the starting as a beginner, and I studied neurophysics therapy under Ken Ware, based in Queensland, and became a practitioner, a therapist in that space, dealing with a lot of high-end cases of brain injury, PTSD, other kind of autoimmune disorders. When I originally actually set off to do just more high-performance work, I was working with a lot of business people in the area of kind of maintaining sustained performance under stress, but there was a big need in the rehab area. So I ended up doing a lot in that space. And that was a startup. Unfortunately, the health startup space is very different to the tech startup space. And I burnt a lot of money trying to commercialize a business model that was fundamentally going to struggle against a lot of the regulatory framework that we had to deal with in the industry. And so, suffered a big loss in that startup, which is, the entrepreneur's journey. You're winning one day, you're getting kicked in the ass next. And after basically having to make the decision to wind down the rehab side of the business, I got tapped on the shoulder by a group of private investors who had just bought an asset back in the Salesforce space. And they said, Frank, would you do it again? It was an interesting conversation because I hadn't planned on coming back into this space. And it was on the proviso that I could take in what I've learned in the previous 4 or 5 years being in the health space and integrating some of those philosophies into the core DNA of what we do in the business. And under those conditions, I was happy to come back. And they said, we don't care how you get there, mate, just get there. So it was good. And that's what brought me back into the Salesforce space.
Awesome. So what's 8 Squad all about, mate?
Look, again, looking what's the market doing, and certainly in the Salesforce ecosystem, a lot of the good tier 2s, they disappeared. They all got bought out by IBMs, by Infosys, all the big players. And there was room in the market to build another tier 2. And some of the same problems still exist, Shane. It's like, how do we do digital transformation, but do it in a manner which serves the human, the person? When you look at it, I think what a lot of people are experiencing is change fatigue. Disruption has been a mantra that is certainly the tech industry has been holding on its chest for a long time. But I saw the other side of that disruption from a health perspective. I saw what it was doing to people. I saw what it was doing to families, to communities. So we came at it from the perspective of, well, hold on, how can we leverage innovation, but do it in a manner which serves humanity, doesn't disrupt humanity, right? That actually delivers a positive purpose. And so when we look at doing these things, let's take a human-centered lens from the experience of the person who has to engage this whole digital transformation space, whether it be as a consumer, whether it be as an employee, or whether it be as a business leader. And so that became the fabric of what were the underlying tenets of 8 Squad, But then we also looked at our business model itself, We totally flipped it on its head. We moved away from that whole central command and control model that most professional services are built on, where you've got a central governor of command that dictates how the business is run. And so we took this notion of complex adaptive systems into the underlying design of the business itself, hence the name 8 Squad, right? And put in place a whole different governance framework, which really pushes decision-making more to the edges of the business, where the business is actually engaging the market, because we believe, it's going to be better for our customers, for their customers, and for our business to stay agile to changing market conditions. And mate, we really tested that hypothesis because we started this business. I came in May 2019, had to do a whole business transformation because we pulled apart what the asset we bought and put it back together with a new model. And then come March 2020, COVID hits. Right. And, so if you're going to test that theory of how adaptable you are to market conditions, well, there's nothing better than that to kind of put you to the test. And we got through that quite, we grew, mate. We've more than doubled the size of the business in that period, both in headcount, revenue, and on all the metrics. And so, but we did it in a manner which allowed the business to self-organize and adapt to the conditions, because the market was so dynamic and so changing. Different industries were changing. Some were great, some were not so great. We were in both of those, and you kind of had to make decisions on the fly. Yeah, so that's essentially 8 Squad was born in one of the most difficult conditions that we've faced as a nation, really. And we've come out the back of it in a pretty strong position. So, Salesforce services, but ultimately about delivering kind of solutions that serve humans as a core theme.
Yeah, and it certainly sounds like your approach to culture has somewhat carried you through a pretty tough time, right?
100%. Look, mate, the Drucker saying culture eats strategy for breakfast, that's the one that's, stuck with me in 2009 and has carried me through. And And I think it is everything, like how we create a culture and really defining what our culture is. People use the term culture, too loosely, really having a clear definition of what we'll accept, what we won't, and let people select into that. We spent a lot of time in that process up front.
Yeah, right. It's interesting. You mentioned your venture into sustainable performance. And I think I saw a TEDx description of you said that you work with entrepreneurial executives and CEOs to develop better leaders from within, which I thought was quite unique. And obviously we share a passion for building high-performing teams, which is fairly evident from the way you describe how you've set up 8 Squad. But if I could sort of get you to think for a second about the clients that you've worked with rather than the businesses that you've built, the sort of the CIOs who really nailed it. Could you talk to me a little bit about what you think on the client side a really great team looks like, and what are the organizational benefits of getting that right?
So, mate, almost I'd say in every instance, whether it be teams that I've led or teams that I've worked with from the outside, the ones that get it right is when you've got a leadership who really lives the talk, it doesn't just talk the talk, right? And often when we talk about sustainable high performance, right, there's so many layers to that conversation. And at the end of the day, it takes a high degree of self-awareness. That's the starting point. If you don't have a high degree of self-awareness, you're going to make bad decisions around how you manage your own physical state, which is going to lead to personal burnout. You're going to make bad decisions around how you deal with emotional stress under high stress conditions, and that's going to have an impact on the people you lead. And you're going to make bad decisions around like what decisions you should just stay out of, and not get involved with, right? And so, often leaders who I think lead from this place, everyone I've met, they've often had a very strong grounding in self. They know who they are. They know their strengths and they know their weaknesses, and they don't hide from it. So often the work that I was doing with them was plugging the gaps usually, like how do I have better habits around managing sleep and stress, or movement, things like that. And if anything, taking them deeper into that space of who really am I, like what drives my behavior under certain conditions. And so, in my team at Pivot, we had people who were professionals in the area of psychology and counseling. And so we'd have frameworks to take them into that conversation, right? But those leaders were very embracing of that, where you find other people who we call high performers because the scoreboard that they might be delivering, are not necessarily the high performers you want to work for. These are the ones which are often disruptive in their leadership style. It's the old play hard, work hard kind of rhetoric that you hear, and you see the impacts of that. You see the impacts that they'll get to a result, but there's always going to be at a cost, right? And you see it everywhere. We've been into organizations where people are burnt out, and you just kind of look at the kind of leadership they're under. And that's where it's pushed without the awareness of impact. And it really comes down to that level of awareness in your leadership. And that's very consistent with the many different organizations I'd worked with over time. Aware leaders usually equals much better sustainable results in the long haul.
And so I think that's the crux of it, right? The benefit there is that your high performance is sustainable.
Yeah. And sustainability, it's, like, okay, how many layers? We've got sustainable to financial performance level. You're not going to have these big holes because people are going to be generally making better decisions more often because of the level of self-awareness they have, right? People are not going to hit the wall and potentially go through burnout, right? You're not going to have people leaving your business for the wrong reasons. That's the other thing. Typically when people are burnt out, often they'll leave for the wrong reasons as opposed to really the right reasons, because there's so much fog clouding their judgment, right? And so when we look at sustainability, performing is one thing, but do it in a manner which is healthy for your individuals, for your people, because they carry all that stuff home to their families. And that's the other part of it. I saw it all too often, mate. When I was in the rehab center, I'd see some very burnt out exec come in, and he'd always be coming in with his kids and his wife, right? Everyone's feeling the impact of that person hitting the wall. And so I just saw that all too many times.
Wow. That is really insightful. Thank you. If we think about, we kind of talked about what good leadership looks like and the benefits of that. Could you explore how you achieve that with your leaders at 8 Squad? And I'm thinking about, you talked about tribal leadership. John King, I even saw that he spoke to your team on social. So that'd be interesting to explore. But could you talk about like that and the 8 Squad Academy, this culture of trust and this concept of flow?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, they're all part of a leadership framework, right? So we use, a framework which I'd spent those 5 years developing, which was really holistic in its approach. So firstly, with any kind of cultural environment, culture it's a expression of language and self. It's an emergent thing that comes out of people's communication, right? So if you're going to build a culture, then have one which is based on the same common language. And often, so things like tribal leadership gives us some of those things, to anchor into, to have conversations around. So we deployed that whole, okay, what stage do we want to be, and if I'm having a bad day, coming in and being able to say, look, I'm having a stage 2 day today, which is typically my life sucks, right? And it's okay, recognizing that I'm in my life sucks right now. And so before I can even hear that we're great, I need to get back to my own greatness, and so it just gives us a really nice way of being able to put language to things and all have the same interpretation of what that is. And then within our kind of leadership framework, which we apply for all our people, we look at leadership from a multiple construct. And one is, embodied state. How are people turning up physically? And not just giving them some online lessons to go and tick the box that they've done around, well-being, but actually this is embedded into the core fabric of everything we do with our people. So what are their rituals? What are their practices? What are their habits around how they eat, how they move, how they sleep, and how they manage stress? And that's something that's embedded even into our reviews, into how we measure people, monitor people, because we know that if they're not doing that, from a leadership perspective, they won't have the capacity to deal with the tough problems when they need to, right? Because when you're not managing your physical resources well, you're always going to trend towards decisions which are the easier decision to make, not the necessarily right decision to make. So that's the first dimension, embodied state, how we actually train them to do that. Then there's the system of belief, which is really around the lenses they put over themselves to view the world through, right? And it's their biases, their subjective perceptions, all that kind of stuff. How do situations occur to them, knowing that there's always 3 sides of the truth. There's your truth, there's the other person's truth, and there's the real truth in the middle, right? And so teaching people how to understand that, because as a leader, I expect all our leaders, all our squad leaders, that's where the self-awareness comes in, to have a very acute sense of who they are and what's driving their decisions on a daily basis, and more so what drives those decisions under good conditions and under bad conditions, because that's what we can coach through. So we have external coaches who work with our people so they can actually have open and frank conversations, because what often happens is a lot of what drives behavior in most people, it's old trauma, mate, and we have to actually support them to be able to have those conversations with someone independent. So every employee in our business gets access to those coaches, not just a select few. Then there's a kind of system of knowledge where it's what most companies do well, to be honest. What are the skills that I need? What are the things I need to know in order to perform my job well, right? But we have some curriculum around that where is unique to our program, especially around complex systems and how complex systems function, stuff like that, certain leadership approaches. So we look at those 3 domains as a holistic approach to developing robust leaders, those that under high stress conditions know exactly what they've got to tune. Is it something I don't know that I need to catch up on? Is it a bias that I have around how situations are occurring to me? Or am I just tired and I need to actually go through some active recovery cycles, right? So it's kind of all our leaders have to get to a level of blue belt as a minimum, because really at the blue belt level of our academy, you've proven a base level of mastery over those core elements. And then some choose to go on to kind of, black belt, but we don't expect them all to do that.
You talked about the belts, and the academy. Are you following your martial arts background there?
100%, mate. You know, one thing martial arts does really well is, if I use the popular jiu-jitsu metaphor, you know, you can walk into a Gracie jiu-jitsu school anywhere in the world, and you know exactly what you're going to get when you're rolling with a white belt, a yellow belt, or blue belt, or a black belt. And so belts for us are a manner in where we can actually, it's like we can prove that someone gets it. And it's not just rote learning. It's not, I'll sit a test and just remember stuff. It's kind of like martial arts. Show me you remember. Show me you understand how to apply what you learned. And then tell me the insights that evolve from the thing that you learned, right? And you can't fake that stuff. It's not something you can cram for the night before, or go look at some videos and remember the stuff and go apply it, right? And so white belt and yellow belt are very much about building awareness. So am I aware of my habits, my behaviors? Am I aware of how my movement patterns affect me on a day-to-day basis, right? And then where do I want to be? Building that desire, you know, like, okay, I know I need to change now. Where am I headed? And once we start getting to kind of upper yellow belt and green belt, we're starting to actually, now these are the habits I'm going to change. This is what I'm committing to. These are the movement practices that I have to prove I can actually do when I come back for my grading, right? Here are the decisions I've made around diet, because we've done our DNA screen, and I can actually see now that certain things affect me in certain ways, which I didn't have an awareness of before. So I'm making decisions based on data, not just because it's the latest fad diet that everyone's talking about. And from a stress perspective, you know, I've learned to read my data. By the time people get to green belt, we're starting to advocate biotech. So they'll use different tools and devices to give them statistics about how they sleep, you know, how their nervous system's recovered overnight. And what we're looking for is then how do they apply that, right, on a week by week basis to manage their kind of state and how they're turning up to stressful situations. So when they go through their gradings, just like in any martial arts grading, you actually have to prove you get it. And if you don't get it, you're going to get punched in the face. You know, we're not going to punch them in the face, but, you know, that's typically what would happen in a grading. So that's how we move people through the belts.
Awesome. So then, you know, we've talked a lot about what good looks like. And, you know, there might be some people listening right now thinking, crikey, that's a lot to absorb and I'm feeling overwhelmed. Where do I possibly start with all this stuff? You know, if I'm let's say a platform owner in a business and I'm trying to build a high performing team, what's 2 or 3 practical tips that you might be able to, you know, impart?
I think taking an audit first, you know, it's kind of audit of yourself, you know, like, okay, how committed to self-learning are you? It starts with you, you know, it really does. And looking at it from that holistic perspective, you know, even taking that adaptive human model that we use, you can go, well, okay, if I look at how physically I show up in the world, what am I doing about how I eat, how I move, how I sleep? And like, do I actually have any real disciplines and practices? Because that all determines how the quality of my thinking on a day by day, right? Because if I can't master myself, I can't lead people to mastering themselves. That's the first step, you know. Then I think coaching, what kind of coaching support frameworks do you have in place for yourself and your people? You know, do you have coaching which allows people to have honest conversations so they can be transparent, so they can feel like they can dip into the well of failure but come out of it with some kind of positive learning and outcome, you know, as opposed to just having that used as a mechanism to beat them on the head with, right? And being used in a performance improvement program, right? So your culture has to support that. It has to support an environment that creates safety for those kind of conversations. And then ultimately, where are my gaps in that? You know, often the area of knowledge, that's what people do really well. You know we use Agile, we use Scrum, we do these things. We need to get people skilled up on these processes. Everyone does that really well today, right? But then those other two is where everyone forgets. Oh, but we've got a well-being program. No, you don't. What you've got is a bunch of online learning things which people can opt into and maybe tick the box to say they've done it. But you've got to appreciate that any kind of change at that level takes time. it takes effort, it takes practice. And so I think just people having an honest assessment of their workplace, their team, their environment around these things is a good place to start, just so they can kind of start to see where they've got gaps, where they might want to investigate and kind of fine tune.
Awesome. Mate, just coming up on time. Thanks for spending some time with us today. If people want to get in touch with you or 8 Squad, how do they reach out to you?
Mate, you can almost get me on any platform these days, either LinkedIn or come in through our website and just request contact and someone will definitely get you to me. Otherwise, frank.cuiuli@8squad.com.au if anyone wants to email me directly, but I'm pretty easy to find, Shane.
Awesome, Frank. I really appreciate your time and your insight.
Thank you very much, mate. It was great talking to you.
You've been listening to Platform Diaries with Shane Williams. For more information or to contact Shane, please visit shanewilliams.com.au. Until next time, thanks for listening.